Spring arrived in 1200 BC, bringing with it a moment that would shatter one young life forever. Nefertari, barely 9 years old, stood trembling in the courtyard of Ammon's temple at Karnak. Around her, priests prepared their bronze razors, ready to strip away every strand of her childhood. 3 days earlier, her father had brought her here. He was a minor official drowning in debt, unable to pay what he owed in grain or silver. So he paid with something else, his daughter. He told her this was an honor, that serving the gods was a privilege. But as the cold blade scraped across her scalp, removing the beautiful black braids she'd worn with pride, Nefertari understood the truth. She began to cry. The slap came hard and fast. An older priestess struck her face without mercy. "Servants of the god do not cry," the woman hissed. "You have no tears anymore, no name. You belong to Ammon now, and Ammon does not tolerate weakness." That single moment destroyed everything Nefertari had been. What followed was 43 years of confinement, control, and systematic exploitation, hidden behind walls decorated with scenes of divine beauty. She would never leave these grounds, never marry freely, never own anything, never control what happened to her own body. But here's what history never tells you. Nefertari wasn't alone. Thousands of girls and women lived and died inside Egypt's temples, dressed in purity but trapped in servitude. They carried sacred-sounding titles: wives of the god, servants of the divine, hands of the goddess, the pure ones. Behind these beautiful names existed a system designed to destroy lives. This is the truth carved in forgotten papyri and temple archives. This is how religious power became a weapon against the vulnerable. If you want to uncover history's darkest secrets, subscribe to Echoes of History right now. Hit that subscribe button, because what comes next is darker than you can imagine. These stories deserve to be told, and these voices deserve to be heard. When people today imagine ancient Egyptian priestesses, they picture elegance, graceful women in white linen performing sacred rituals, honored servants of powerful gods. That image is completely false. It's ancient propaganda that survived for thousands of years. Let's expose the truth. The most common Egyptian term was Hemit, meaning servant of the god or wife of the god. Other titles included Shemayat for singers and musicians, and Kenrit for general temple attendants. Each role had specific duties, but all shared one reality. These women were bound to temple service, strictly controlled, stripped of autonomy and identity. And that word, virgin, it didn't mean sexual innocence. In temple language, purity meant ritual purity, a state defined entirely by priests. It referred to being untouched by the profane world. But this purity was imposed through absolute control. Control over bodies, movements, relationships. They were kept pure for the gods, which really meant kept accessible to the priests who claimed divine authority. Here's the crucial truth. Most of these women never chose this life. Many were given to temples as children, long before they could understand what it meant. Families dedicated daughters as religious offerings, sometimes seeking divine favor, sometimes just to reduce the number of mouths to feed. What looked like piety was actually permanent surrender. The girl was given away and never came back. Others were given as debt payment, just like Nefertari. Egyptian temples weren't just religious centers. They were economic powerhouses, owning vast lands, lending grain and silver, collecting taxes. When families couldn't pay, they paid with their daughters. It was state-sanctioned human trafficking, wrapped in religious devotion. Then, there were girls captured as tribute. Egyptian armies routinely took people from Nubia, Libya, and the Levant. Among the captives were young girls delivered to temples and absorbed into a system of holy servitude with no possibility of escape. The ages were horrifyingly young. Temple records mention initiates entering service at just 8 or 9 years old, many before puberty. These were children incapable of consent, trapped in a system that would consume their entire lives. Let me tell you about one specific girl, Mutuya. She was 8 years old when Egyptian soldiers came to her Nubian village. They were collecting tribute: gold, grain, ivory, and children. Among those chosen was little Mutuya. She and 12 others were tied together with ropes and forced to march north. The journey stretched hundreds of kilometers and lasted weeks. Mutuya didn't speak Egyptian. She had no idea where she was going. She cried without stopping until a guard struck her face and told her crying was forbidden. From that moment, she learned to cry in silence. When she finally arrived in Thebes, she was assigned to the temple of Mut, goddess of motherhood. The cruel irony would become clear with time. She now served a goddess symbolizing mothers while being denied the right to ever become one herself. The process that turned children like Nefertari and Mutuya into temple property was deliberately designed to break them completely. Once accepted into service, each girl underwent rituals meant to strip away her past identity and reshape her into an obedient servant. The first was called purification by water. The child was brought to a sacred pool, undressed, and washed repeatedly with water mixed with natron, a natural salt compound. But what was presented as cleansing was deeply invasive. These purification baths were ritualized examinations disguised as holy acts. Priests inspected every inch of the girl's body under the pretense of ensuring purity. When Nefertari was brought to the stone pool, 3 priests and 2 older women waited. She hesitated to remove her clothes. One woman grabbed her and tore them away. The water was freezing cold. One priest stepped into the pool beside her, ordering her to stand still. Then slowly, he began touching her in ways that made her tremble with discomfort. When she recoiled, he seized her arm. "The gods are watching," he said coldly. "They are testing your obedience." Nefertari froze in terror and endured in silence. That moment, disguised as sacred duty, was her first violation. It set the tone for everything that followed, teaching her that her body no longer belonged to her. After purification came the shaving ritual. Every strand of hair was removed. Officially, this preserved ritual purity. In truth, it served to break the girl's sense of self. Hair represented beauty, vanity, personal pride. Removing it erased individuality. When Nefertari looked at her reflection in a bronze mirror afterward, she couldn't recognize the face staring back. That person wasn't Nefertari anymore. It was what the temple had molded her into. The next ritual was renaming. Her birth name, the one her mother gave her, was taken away forever. The priests assigned her a new identity, Nefert Nebit, meaning beautiful is the lady. She was ordered never to speak her true name again. That name connecting her to her family was declared dead. The renaming marked the symbolic death of the child's former self. She was no longer her father's daughter. She was now the temple's creation, a living offering belonging entirely to the gods. But the process didn't stop there. After cleansing, shaving, and renaming came the darkest ritual of all, the divine marriage ceremony. Each girl was symbolically married to the god she would serve. The temple presented this as a great honor. The child was dressed in fine white linen, her bald head covered with an ornate wig, her body adorned with jewelry. She was brought before the deity's statue to swear vows of eternal service. Priests recited ritual words as if the god himself was speaking through them, accepting the girl as the god's bride. When Mutuya underwent this ritual, she was 10 years old. Dressed in brilliant white linen, her small body gleaming with golden ornaments, she was led into the inner sanctuary, a dark chamber dominated by the towering figure of the goddess Mut. The high priest began chanting in the ancient sacred tongue, claiming it was Mut's own voice. He proclaimed that Mutuya was chosen, pure, and blessed to become the goddess's bride. Then he ordered her to repeat the words, I take these vows. I give myself to Mut. My body is her temple. My life is her property. I will serve in purity and obedience forever. She repeated each phrase without hesitation, without understanding what they truly meant. That moment bound her to the temple for life. Life inside the temple was designed with absolute precision, structured, isolated, controlled to eliminate any chance of rebellion or escape. Let's walk through a single day in Nefertari's life. She woke before sunrise in a communal dormitory surrounded by dozens of other young women. Younger, girls slept under supervision of older attendants, women who had spent decades inside the system and no longer remembered freedom. Privacy didn't exist. The morning began with purification rituals. Each woman washed herself, then dressed in plain white linen robes, marking her as temple property. Afterward came assigned labor, endless hours weaving cloth, grinding grain, preparing offerings, or cleaning sanctuaries. Monotonous work disguised as holy service. But what made it unbearable wasn't just the labor. It was the silence. The women were forbidden to speak unless spoken to. Any unnecessary conversation was punished harshly. The silence severed human connection, preventing friendship or trust. They were surrounded by others, yet completely alone. Nefertari's only friend was a girl named Takayat. They worked side by side at the looms. Although speaking was forbidden, sometimes they whispered quietly to each other. One afternoon, the supervisor noticed. Without warning, she struck Takayat across the neck with a wooden stick. Takayat was dragged outside while the overseer shouted, "This is what happens to those who break the silence." For 3 days, Takayat was gone. When she returned, she never spoke again, not even in whispers. Her eyes were lifeless. 2 months later, she vanished completely. The supervisor simply announced that Takayat had been found impure and returned to the gods. No one was told what that meant, but everyone knew. Surveillance went far beyond that. The women were watched constantly. Their movements were restricted. Contact with families was forbidden. Control extended into every aspect of existence. They were subjected to regular inspections to ensure ritual purity. These examinations, performed by priests, were deeply invasive. Nefertari learned to disconnect her mind from her body during them, letting her thoughts drift away while the violations took place. If a woman showed unhappiness or resisted, punishment followed: extra labor, starvation, or beatings. Escape was impossible. They had been taken so young, they no longer remembered life beyond the temple walls. Among the temple women, some held a special designation: wives of the god. They participated in rituals known as sacred unions, ceremonies supposedly meant to reenact divine myths and ensure Egypt's fertility. The texts describing them sound poetic, filled with metaphorical language and religious symbolism. But in reality, these ceremonies hid something horrific. High-ranking priests, especially the high priest of Ammon, claimed to physically embody the god during these events. They dressed in divine garments, performed elaborate rituals, and declared that their actions represented the god working through them. The women chosen were told they were about to receive the god's blessing. They were brought into inner sanctuaries and warned that resistance would bring divine wrath, that defiance could doom all of Egypt. And then the priests, claiming divine right, enacted what they called the God's sacred marriage. Let's be clear. These were not holy unions. They were acts of coercion between powerful men and powerless women indoctrinated from childhood to believe their bodies belonged to the gods. When Nefertari was selected for her first sacred union ritual, she was only 14 years old. She was told that the god Ammon himself would bless her. On the ritual night, she was led into the temple's inner sanctuary. The air hung thick with incense. The high priest, his face hidden behind an ornate mask, approached and instructed her to submit completely. Nefertari didn't understand what he meant. She froze as his hands reached to remove her garments. Then she understood and instinctively stepped back. But other priests reassured her, whispering that this was the God's will. The high priest warned her that refusing would be blasphemy, an insult to Ammon himself. What followed was recorded as a successful sacred union. But Nefertari knew the truth. It wasn't sacred. It was violation wrapped in ritual, rape disguised as religion. Some women were forced to participate in these unions many times. Even worse, some conceived children. Those children were officially declared blessed, yet they stood as undeniable proof of what had been done to their mothers. At 16, Nefertari realized she was pregnant. Nefertari was moved to separate lodging where other expectant women lived, every one of them victims of the same system. An older woman told her softly, "Don't hope too much. Once your child is weaned, it will be taken. If it's a girl, she'll serve here like us. If it's a boy, the priest will raise him. You'll still belong to the temple, just as your child will." Nefertari gave birth to a daughter. For 3 brief years, she cared for her child. Then the girl was taken away to begin her own training. Nefertari returned to her duties, seeing her daughter only from afar in temple corridors, never allowed to speak, never allowed to acknowledge her. Watching her little girl endure the same breaking process she had suffered was the cruelest punishment of all. What happened to those who dared resist was meant to terrify everyone else. Some women suffered what records call dedication to the desert. They were dragged beyond temple walls and left alone under the burning sun without food or water. Death by exposure, slow and excruciating. One woman was Renutmahet. During a midday meal, she suddenly rose and shouted, "This is not holy. These men are not gods. We are prisoners." The entire hall went silent. Renutmahet was seized instantly and taken outside. Every woman in the temple was forced to watch as she was led into the desert and abandoned. The next morning, they were brought to see what remained of her body, already half devoured by wild animals. The high priest declared, "This is the fate of the impure." But Renutmahet's defiance left another kind of legacy. It taught the others that rebellion had to be silent and invisible. Resistance survived in secret meanings hidden within songs, in brief glances exchanged during prayers, or in small acts of defiance like deliberate weaving errors that spelled faint words. "I resist." Most temple women died within those walls, spending entire lifetimes in enforced service. When they died, they were buried in unmarked mass graves, their names erased from memory. When Nefertari died at 52, her body was placed in a pit beside 3 other women. No coffin, no funeral rites. Her daughter, now grown and serving the same institution, was forbidden to mourn. Yet some refused to disappear entirely. In hidden corners, on fragments of stone, they carved short messages. "I was born free. They took that from me. Remember that we were people." And there was Mutuya, the Nubian girl. 2 days before her death, she etched her final words into a dark chamber's wall. "I came from beyond the first waterfall. My mother's name was Manatori. I remember her voice. I never forgot who I was before they took me. This life was not my choice. If you find this, know that I lived. Know that I remembered." Her message still whispers from the stone. I existed. I mattered. Remember me. This is the truth Egyptian temples tried to bury. Thousands of women taken as children, exploited for decades, erased in death. Today, visitors marvel at these temples' beauty, admiring their pillars and carvings, rarely realizing the suffering that unfolded within them. But now you know. When you look at those ancient walls, you'll see them differently. Behind painted scenes of gods and kings were women like Nefertari, Mutuya, and countless others whose names are lost. They were real people who endured unimaginable cruelty and still found ways to fight back, even if only through a scratch in stone. What do you think of their story? How should history remember these monuments of oppression? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe these forgotten voices deserve to be heard, subscribe to Echoes of History. Here we uncover the stories official history tried to silence. The temples still stand. The stones still remember. And now you do too.